Thank you. Mr. Rich is
Morning.
ready. Thank you. Mr. Rich, yesterday we spoke about the evaluation board and COMPEC and MAPEC. I'm going to start today in early 1996. And can we look at POL 000-31278, please? That's an email to you of the 10th of January 1996. Can we look at the top half of that page, please? So there is a meeting with CardLink. Basil Shaw and Wendy Powney met with CardLink. Who are they?
They are I think they're IT people, and I think they're POCL IT people. I know Wendy well because eventually she worked for me, but not at this time.
And that says, it became quite clear that our requirements process is lacking in three major areas: reconciliation, role of TIP, office balance, cash accounting process, and interfaces with the TMS. If we don't give them direction, which they're desperately seeking, they are very likely to choose an option which is not in our best interests. Do you know who that direction was to? If we don't give them the direction, who would you be directing?
I don't think it's for me to direct them. I think this is me then coming to me because I'm part of the evaluation board in my role as partnership development person, then working to Mr. People. And they're saying, I think I explained yesterday, we allowed the group IT people and our own IT people access to the suppliers as the bids were evolving, so that, but although they weren't part of the formal procurement process and therefore didn't form part of the value assessment factor group because they weren't at sufficient arm's length to do that, whereas I think John Marr and I think that must be Jeremy Folk are. I think they're part of that team. And I think what he was doing was asking me to coordinate within the business the relevant experts in that field to try to clarify some of the reconciliation, cash accounting interface with the TMS. I can't remember what TMS stands for. Role of TIP is transaction information processing. And I think, I can't remember the date, this is January 96, and I think you'll find in the bundles notes from or to me from relevant financial experts within the business around those reconciliation and accounting issues. So I was sort of promulgating the action so that his concerns would be addressed.
Absolutely. So when we look at the bottom of this page, it seems as though the affected area seems to be commercial. So you're looking at it from a commercial perspective at that stage in relation to those issues rather than technical. Is that right, or have I misunderstood?
Yeah, I don't think that's quite right. This is a memo to me, isn't it? If you just go back to the top of it.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, sorry, so it's not from me. Okay, so an early commercial must have supported by charter assurance did not control the end-to-end client product. This was to ensure so it could not cut POs out of traction. Yeah, I understand. That was Charterhouse were reviewing the overall financial security and probity of the whole thing for us. There are other documents that relate to them, I think, in COMPEC and MAPEC papers with their input. And I think this is really more about what the service specification requirement really was, the SSRs as they became known, which were fed in both from ourselves and from DSS and Benefits Agency to the, I don't know if it was 5 suppliers or 3 suppliers at that stage.
If we look at the bottom right-hand corner in those 2 bullet points, the top one is POCL will have to rely on the benefits agency or the service provider for accurate information for settlement. That was a concern, so it seems as though what POCL would like is to control the end-to-end process. Is that a fair?
Well, they would certainly need to be able to assure it and accurate, because of course those processes and the information flows from the system would have not only told the relevant client, like the benefits agency, whether or not their service had been provided and settled, but also would have told our own accounts team that it had been in parallel. I think I think I remember that both. You see, it says copy to Ian Gare, Tim Brown, Kevin Corrigan, Byron for comment. Tim Brown was one of the assistant finance directors at the time, and he would have assured it. And I think I remember that the chief auditor, Peter Dent, also had input in one of the documents I've read.
If we move on to February of that year, 1996, can we look at poll 3028288, please? This is a meeting note from the evaluation board. We can see there that the chair is Bob People, and I think you're listed as one of the attendees.
Yes, as I said yesterday, yes.
And there are representatives, as you said yesterday, I think from the benefits agency as well, who attend that meeting.
Yes, and the Social Security Agency for Northern Ireland, and DETA is the department, I think that's the Department of Social Security's IT people.
Thank you. Yesterday we heard from John Roberts, who received updates about the evaluation board, but these are the actual evaluation board's own minutes. Can we look at page 3 of these minutes, please? And focusing in on the bottom half of the page, that's 2.7 and 2.8. I'm going to read those. 2.7, with respect to the certificate for pathway, the evaluation board expressed severe reservations about the number of significant risks against the pathway proposal. It questioned whether the cumulative effect would not lead to potentially late delivery and or operational problems, and as such, it would was cause for pathway to be excluded from the invitation to tender. Particular concerns were expressed about the card technology, with shortcomings in the associated management of fraud, and about the dependence on Isha as a small company subcontracted to Pathway. 2.8, Tony Johnson. Who was Tony Johnson?
He was in the, I can't remember, I was thinking about this the other day, I can't remember which organisation he came from, but he was part of the demonstrator team within the assessment team, the one run by Andrew Stott.
So Mr. Johnson explained that these issues had indeed been given much consideration by the demonstrator team. It had concluded that the pathway solution was not fundamentally flawed, and that from a strictly technical viewpoint, the hurdle had been cleared.
Yes.
In its overall decision, the evaluation board might wish to take into account the cumulative effect of any contractual issues with those from the requirements area. So not fundamentally flawed, that's a phrase that we heard yesterday as well. I mean, that's not a ringing endorsement of the system, is it?
No, it's not a ringing endorsement, I agree with that, but it was a statement we relied upon at the evaluation board, noting the risks, among others, that are in paragraph 2.7. It was, and as I also explained yesterday, I think that when this eventually went to MAPEC, the Major Projects Expenditure for the main Post Office Board, the paper would have had to have group IT technical concurrence.
Absolutely.
And they said it is acceptable, even if it's not ideal.
And in terms of the 3 potential options,
Yes.
Pathway was the least technically strong of the 3.
Yeah, I think I know what you're referring to, because it said the evaluation, it came third in six, I can't remember how many, but each one cleared the hurdle, and each one had their own issues, is the truth. So you had to apply an overall judgment about the evaluation, not only on its technical merits, which had to be acceptable, and know the risks you were going into in trying to manage those, but also the other aspects from the other issues around operational, management, contractual, and PFI compliance.
Also highlighted in the section I've just read are concerns about the dependence on Isha as a small company, and also concerns about the card technology at that stage.
Yes. The card technology was, I read forgive me if I've got his name wrong, Mr. Scipioni's technical, I was given access to his witness statement a couple of days ago. And you have to remember what the technology was like at that point. You know, it was a very different world then. So ICL was relying on magnetic stripe technology for this. We looked at and considered something that came up from them, which was a card that included an integrated circuit, known these days more as a smart card. And at that time in this country, at any rate, that was very new technology, more expensive, quite risky of itself, gave benefits agency some concerns about the security aspects associated with having those cards for benefit encashment. So we decided that would be more risky. As for the dependence on ESHA, yes, I understand that as well. We knew that they had a proprietary bit of software called Riposte, and it hadn't been proven at scale because the demonstrator was, I think, an office in Ireland, basically, if I remember rightly. But then,
I think it may have been in the United States.
well, okay, I thought they went to see something. I thought they went to see something that they trialled in Ampos, but I may misremember. Forgive me.
No, I think you may be right. It may have been.
I think they're an American company. I think.
Absolutely.
I think, but we knew that risk, and we weren't shy about telling ICL Pathway about that risk, and that they would have to address it if they were going to go forward. And hence why we put the mitigating stuff around the risk later on.
And can we look at 2.10? So that's over the page. Derek Selwood. Who was Derek Selwood? Sorry. Are you able to assist?
He's again part of the assessment team.
Derek Selwood confirmed that risks and issues against the service providers would be taken into account in the evaluation and selection process. The risk against Pathway would incur a substantial cost penalty given their number and severity. The issues identified during the demonstrator would affect the value factor assessment, and it would be for the evaluating board to give due weight to that in reaching its decision. Now, sometimes a proposal might just make the cut, but everybody in the room knows that ultimately the penalties will mean that it's ruled out. How did you feel at that time? Did you have any feelings about Pathway?
Well, I knew there were some risks with it, as there were with others. It was very difficult, really, at that time to go out and say, oh, look, here's this system somewhere else that's been done before, because there was nothing like it. And there was certainly nothing like it done under a private finance initiative. So we were all, I think it's fair to say, learning, because you couldn't say, IBM couldn't show us, or CardLink couldn't show us, here's something we've done extensively like this in the States, and also transferred the risk of a large part of fraud at the same time. So you had to do that. But I don't think it was with reluctance that we chose them. We were looking to try to secure an automation provider for both us and for the government.
While we're on this document, can we just look at paragraph 2.12 below?
Yeah.
I don't need to read out the paragraph there, but it suggests that there was some confusion over the requirements for EPOS at that stage. Do you remember that?
I'm trying to remember, sorry. I'm just reading the material. I think this was about when and where EPOS would be down the track in terms of its releases. As I said, we put in the requirements that it had to, the solution had to be able to replicate existing processes, but we knew that it would need to migrate to better automated processes later on. We were trying to give priority to the DSS service, the benefit encashment service.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the very point that I make, that at that stage, the non-benefits agency part was very much in its early thinking when it comes to something like that.
I think we'd fleshed it out, but we also realised that it might change over time depending on what other clients might want to be taken on, for example. There were competitive pressures from competitors, which the Federation of Sub-Postmasters weren't slow to tell us about, from people who were, later on you'd seen it in other documents, a competitor was putting out an automated payment terminal for bill payments, which the Sub-Postmasters were waiting for Horizon to do.
But EPOS itself was pretty fundamental to the non-benefits agency part of Horizon.
Yeah, and the join up with the back office systems.
And it seems that in early 1996, at least, it was only very much in its early stages, and there was, according to this minute, some confusion over what was required. Do you agree with that?
I don't remember it, is the truth, but that's what it says here, so I take it as read.
Can we move on to a board paper? It's Pol 000312237.
Excuse me.
And in fact, this document starts as a board paper, but can we go to page 9?
Can you just tell me what date that is, please?
The document on page 9 will assist, actually.
Thank you. Oh, yes, I remember this now. Yep, thank you.
I'm just looking for the date. The date of the...
No, I understand. This followed the evaluation board more or less immediately, once the recommendation had been made and mandates were being sought.
So this is a minute from Bob People to the Project Steering Committee? Yeah.
We knew it as the Joint Steering Committee, so I'm not quite sure about that, but fine, okay.
Paragraph 1 sets out the purpose. So the purpose of this minute is to inform you of the substance of the meeting of the Evaluation Board, which I chaired yesterday to consider the report of the evaluation team on the retenders submitted by Tom, Dick and Harry. We went over this yesterday with Mr. Roberts. I think you heard Mr. Roberts' evidence.
Some of it, not all of it.
So Harry was CardLink, Tom was IBM, and Dick was Pathway. Can we look at paragraph 10, please?
Peter Matheson is the Chief Executive of the Benefits Agency, by the way. He's not a post office person.
Thank you. I don't need to read paragraph 10, but essentially there were some wrinkles and they needed to issue an invitation to retender on the 16th of April. Do you remember that?
I can remember there was some iteration. I don't remember the detail, I'm afraid.
That's fine. Can we look at paragraph 13, which is over the page? And could we focus in on that paragraph, please? That addresses the technical aspects, and as you said earlier, on a technical level, all three satisfied the minimum levels. Is that right?
Yes.
Can we look at paragraph 16? That's over the page. and it was ICL that was closest to the risk transfer sort. Do you remember that?
ICL, as far as I can remember, were the only ones that met that hurdle. I think Cardlink was eliminated on other factors, and then IBM were only prepared to take risk at a pound for pound. And I think I may have these numbers wrong, so forgive me, but they'll be right in the order of magnitude. I think Pathway were prepared to put up about 200 million of risk transfer.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And can we go to paragraph 30 to 32 on page 15, please? Would it be possible to highlight this? Thank you very much. Essentially, Pathway, Dick, was closest to what sponsors had sought to obtain, particularly in terms of the risk transfer. Is that right?
Sorry, that was a question. Yes, it was. Yeah, sorry.
Paragraph 33. The board recognised that an award to Dick would imply a need for a proactive management stance by sponsors. What did you understand by that?
Well, any set of risks needs managing, and it means that both sponsors had the need to put forward a suitable method of managing those risks. The way we decided to do that was, as I said yesterday, to create this program delivery authority, jointly staffed by BA and POCL people in the same building, working together, which was an interesting cultural dynamic, headed up by a DSS person to give the client reassurance, and because they had skills, supplementing that with external contractors who had technical skills where necessary, and then create, I don't know what, BA and DSS had their own project team, I think, also, because I used to meet my equivalent, as it were, on what became the PDA board. But we also set up teams within Post Office in parallel to check what the PDA was doing and if there were any commercial or contractual issues. And I say that about the commercial contractual issues because clearly the contract hadn't been let then, and there was still this to come, and then we had to finalise our agreements with Benefits Agency on the back of that, because that was a back-to-back arrangement. But we also had to cope with the nature of the private finance initiative in what proactive management meant.
If you're looking for who is responsible for taking forward that proactive management stance, who was that then? Was that the Programme Delivery Authority, or was it a particular individual?
The Programme Delivery Authority on behalf of the two sponsors, and that reported to a project steering committee, confusingly here, that's why I differentiated before, which consisted of the chief executive of ICL, the managing director of POCL, and the chief executive, I think, of the Benefits Agency, being supplied with information. So if there were issues to resolve, that programme steering committee was meant to resolve them.
So there are lots of committees. We've heard about lots of committees. Who within the Post Office would have been responsible for taking forward the proactive management stance?
Well, the managing director essentially would have been mandated by the board. He delegated quite a lot of that to me to do things. He would have also taken a proactive stance, as I did, with the person running the Programme Delivery Authority.
So that's Stuart Sweetman as managing director.
He was by then, yes, I think.
Yourself, and then somebody within...
Peter Graham was the programme director for having taken over from Andrew Stott. I can't remember the exact date. He was another DSS person. George McCorkle in the Benefits Agency, and the PDA board was chaired by, ably I may say, Alec Wiley, who was the chief executive of the Social Security Agency for Northern Ireland.
Can we go back to the document that we were just on, but look at page 1, which is the note for the board? Paragraph 11 on the second page. I won't read it, but it sets out the financial evaluation, 11 and below. And then can we go to the next page, and paragraph 14 is the non-financial evaluation. One of the headings there is non-financial characteristics, and it says the reviewed supplier's performance. This reviewed supplier's performance against a number of characteristics, including customer acceptability, reliability and support management capability, etc. All 3 suppliers exceeded the acceptable level, with the differences between them not significant for the purpose of discrimination. I think that's consistent with what you told us earlier about the 3.
Yes.
There isn't mention there, at least, of concerns about, for example, the dependence on ESHA or the card technology issue.
No, hadn't they been mentioned earlier or in the note?
Well, in fact, it mentions it slightly further down.
Okay.
So paragraph 15 that we can see there, the Programme Evaluation Board recommended pathway, and that was endorsed by the Joint Steering Committee. And then it's paragraph 18, I think, that it is the part of this particular note for the board that addresses the other technical risks in a little bit more detail. Could we have a look at paragraph 18?
Yeah, I see. Okay.
Some technical risks were identified with all suppliers, and in some areas Dick was considered to have higher technical risks than Tom and Harry. However, these risks are manageable through a strong technical assurance function with support from the Post Office IT Directorate, rigorous testing at development, trial and rollout stages, ensuring supplier contingency plans and a proactive technical management plan. Is that the proactive management stance that we talked about earlier, or that Bob People was referring to?
Essentially, I think I just fleshed it out a little bit more in what we actually did rather than what we thought was needed to do, as it were. And it also depending on the strength of the people we both put into that Programme Delivery Authority when we staffed it. But I think for the last, certainly points 2 and 3, I think that's evidenced in all the bundles I've read so far.
So the Post Office IT Directorate were going to
Help.
take responsibility for some of the technical assurance function.
We would have placed people from within the Post Office IT function, either from within Post Office counters or from Group IT into the PDA, and at the same time they would have been assuring the board themselves through the Group IT Director, or to whom he reported at board level, at executive board level, that
Can I just pause you there? Sorry, I'm being told that the transcript has stopped. We may need to pause for a minute or two just while that is rectified. Take a short break, and that can be, I know it's very early already, but seeing as this might take a few minutes, that could be our mid-morning break because we've got a lot to do today.
Yeah, whatever suits best, Mr. Blake, yeah.
Thank you, yes. Can we have a 10-minute break now?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. We can see you now.
Fine.
Thank you. Mr. Rich, I won't go back to that document, but I think that the bottom line from what we've just heard this morning is that Pathway got through the process, but it was very clear that they needed close management. Is that a fair summary?
As far as as within the remit of the PFI, and I think what became clear later on, and there are documents in the bundle, that their idea of what PFI was slightly different to what the sponsors was. I think there's a letter from Keith Todd later on, March 98, to Peter Matheson, Chief Executive of the Benefits Agency, that spells out what they believed PFI meant and the level of unnecessary interference, therefore.
Can you summarise that very briefly then? Was it your position that you could have more involvement, and their position that you shouldn't have the level of involvement that you were seeking?
Yes, yes. If you want to summarise that briefly, yes is the right answer. I think it was really around the extent to which they could, under the PFI, private sector are innovative and can bring their skills to the party, could take the business processes, and we would have to rely on the outputs rather than the details of the design architecture underneath it.
Can I just take you to your witness statement? It's WITN 04030100, and it's page 16 that I'd like to look at.
This is my witness statement.
Yes.
What paragraph?
It's paragraph 47. You say there, some post offices were not easily suitable for IT infrastructure as they did not have the necessary space or equipment. Moreover, Pathway underestimated the amount of new software development needed from its subcontractors, e.g. Isha. Further issue was that the BA DSS CAP system, which was to feed data to Pathway's card system, was not ready. Now, that sounds very much like the problems that were raised at the evaluation board pre-invitation to tender that we saw first thing this morning, don't they?
Well, some of them.
Some of them.
One of the three, but not the other two.
Well, there's the issue with Isha and also the card system, concerns about the card system.
No, I don't think it was I don't think that says. I'm sorry, Mr. Blake. I don't think that says concerns about the
next page. Sorry.
Next page.
Just over
sorry.
the page.
Yes, I see. Thank you. Sorry.
That's okay. That paragraph begins by talking about the infrastructure. Keith Todd may, in due course, say that Post Office couldn't reasonably have believed that their premises were fit for automation and that ICL weren't given a proper opportunity to inspect. Would you agree with that?
I said it was a learning process, and certainly one of the things we knew, but we learnt more systematically, if I can use that word, was that of our 19,600 post offices, they're not a heterogeneous set. You know, you had Crown offices with 20 counter positions and a front room in the Orkneys. I think what Pathway underestimated reasonably was the amount of the network that wasn't covered by ISDN. For those of a certain age, that's the sort of predecessor to broadband, I suppose, on which their system relied for messaging. Therefore, and typically in the smallest offices, of course, or in the most rural ones where BT hadn't at that time, or Energis hadn't done. So they didn't know that until they surveyed, and we wouldn't have been able to tell them that in the statement of service requirement. And of course the ergonomics as well about counter space, and hence why we always insisted that both customer acceptability and how long the transactions would take in case it affected our quality of service queuing time, for example, in bigger offices, and user acceptability in terms of agents or staff being able to use this, both physically and in terms of software, were always included. And I think that's probably why that when we first realised we wouldn't be able to achieve post-contract what we set out to, there was something called a no-fault replan, because the other thing that was mentioned in there, I don't know if you're going to ask me about that, was the DSS issue.
Yes, I'll come to the no-fault replan shortly. You also highlight in your statement that Pathway had underestimated the training time required.
That's true.
You said in terms of infrastructure, their underestimation may have been reasonable. Was it reasonable in respect of training time?
We thought they should have known that it would take, as Mr. Scipione said, we were acquiring a system, not a piece of software, and that system is about people and the human interface of that. That was always at the heart of our business, unlikely as it may sound now. But the training that they set out, which they did, which they were contracted for part of that system, which they subcontracted to a company called Peritas, from memory, probably wasn't as extensive enough. And certainly we pushed back hard at that once we had that pointed out to us, engaging with the Federation and with sub-postmasters and etc.
Is that something that thought was given to during the earlier stages, the evaluation stage, the invitation to tender stage?
I think that did we give it enough thought? That's a good question. Certainly they had to demonstrate capability. You know, it wasn't like going to a Microsoft and saying, I'll have that computer. It was buying a whole system with all that went with it, including putting it in, because we were an unautomated business of 19,600 offices with 70,000 people involved. And it doesn't take a genius to work out that culture change is going to happen overnight without professional training. I've read other documents later on after my time when rollout began, where I've only seen those since you've sent me the inquiry sent me the bundles, so I wouldn't have been there. But I've seen that even in late '99, one of our senior managers was writing to Pathway saying the training is still inadequate.
Moving to February 97 to spring 98, as a member of the PDA board, you received testing reports and something called technical concurrences. Can you briefly describe what technical concurrences were?
Can you show me the... Because they mean different things at different contexts, that's all.
I only need a very brief explanation.
Okay. Technical concurrences meant, is this stuff fit for purpose, and is it working as we think it should, or is it likely to work as we think it should, and is it capable of working as we think it should? And certainly, as I've described before, the Post Office Board was relying on technical concurrence from our own people, from the group IT people downwards, in order to assure its approval of the business case.
You've explained in your statement, paragraphs 54 and 55, that there were delays in spring 97 and into 1998. One of those reasons was an underestimation by Pathway of the effort and time needed to develop the services, and the other was an issue with ESHA.
Yeah.
The ESHA point, again, something that we've heard a lot about this morning, mentioned at the pre-ITT stage.
Yes, it becomes a running sore, is the truth. Yeah. But I know it wasn't like ICL were ignoring it. You know, they were trying to fix it, and they were putting more and more people, technical people, onto it. I think the National Audit Office report says this as well as PA, that ICL thought there'd be more systems integration than systems development involved. You know, they thought they could take pieces of the jigsaw and slot them in. But when they tried to slot them in and then tried to scale them up, it needed systems development as well as integration skills, particularly around complex business rules like the DSS.
In terms of Pathway's underestimation of the effort and time that was needed, was the proactive management stance implemented at that stage? Do you think that ICL were being effectively managed?
I think we were scrutinising them, and I think if we hadn't have done, we would have been tempted to say, OK, that's all right, go ahead then. And we never did that. I personally, and you've got evidence in the bundles, I would never compromise quality for speed. And I think we can demonstrate that by the number of replans, both in terms of rollout to offices and to what was in the various releases that were following the benefits agency one, where we kept staggering them and simplifying them to give it its best chance. But we wanted to try to fix before rolling out, and that was why the approach was taken about an initial go live of one office and then or 10 offices and then a 200 type rollout before any acceptance of the system or rollout, in order to be able to test, because some of things you can't test unless it operates. You can test some things, model office testing and end-to-end testing as it's called, or user acceptability testing, all three of those. But until you actually put it in action in a safe environment, if I can put it that way, so you can tell with real customers and real agents using it, you need to understand what the result of that was.
You talk in your statement, it's paragraph 57, about the causes of delay in rollout being the same as the causes of the no-fault replan.
Yeah.
Very briefly, what were those causes so far as you saw them?
Inability to demonstrate to us completely that to the post office that it was able to work well in offices before rolling it out, an inability from the DSS point of view to securely do the benefit encashment service as far as they were concerned. That was their end testing. Complex, and two other points just in support. Complexities around the installation of the network and the ergonomics that I mentioned earlier, but ICL were more aware of that by then. So they should, by the time after the 96 refault plan, when the new master plan was, as a document describes it, in March 97, which was done for all parties as a replan. And then there was disappointment after that, because ICL failed to deliver again to time. But there was also the DSS issue of whether their own systems were fit for purpose and had been progressing as quickly as ICL believed to feed the system. I think Keith Todd, in a letter said that to Peter Matheson, said that he believed DSS had, quote, misrepresented the state of the CAP systems.
You talked about disappointment. I'm going to move to the summer of 1997. Can we look at poll 000396669? Now, this is a new document in the sense that it has only very recently been shown to you. So if you need more time to look at this document, please do let me know.
Can I have a look? It hasn't come up on the screen.
Well, you'll certainly need more time than that. It should be familiar now, and it's only one sentence that I'd like to take you.
You gave me this at 2:00 yesterday.
Indeed.
So I haven't fully reflected on it. I have to tell you, Chair, I'm sorry about that. But I read it overnight Yeah.
And it's the part just below on pathway that I wanted to draw your attention to. This is a letter from you to Stuart Sweetman.
Yeah, it's an internal memo as I was going on holiday, yeah.
And it says, the technical release slippage is a cause of major concern for the Benefits Agency, not so much for its direct impact, but because of it, it is a very poor signal of ICL's capability so soon after a replan. Am I right to say it sounds as though you're quite concerned by that stage?
I'm concerned, and certainly DSS are. I think this is the time at which we asked, I think you'll see in Peter Copping later on today, we asked PA to come in and do an independent review of where we were to see in mid 97 to check, because one slippage on a no fault replan soon after contract letting, as we're all learning, is one thing, but then for ICL not to be able to do what they said they would do at that point 3 months later is another.
And why would you raise it with Stuart Sweetman?
Because Stuart needed to know, because he was part of the programme steering committee. I said earlier that major issues would have had to be resolved, and I would have always kept the managing director, to whom I was a direct report, appraised of the situation, because he may well have been dealing with other stakeholders like politicians, ministers, and people like John Roberts, actually, as well.
I'm going to take you to one more document of the same period. This is going to be the 6th of May, so a few days later. It's Pol 000-39668. And I apologise, this is again another one of those documents that you've only recently seen.
It's not on my screen yet, sorry, Mr. Blake. Ah, yes.
So it's from you to Min Burdett? Who's Min Burdett?
Min Burdett is someone within the technical assurance team. She's a technician working to Mina Rigo. You see Mina there, and Mina was a direct report to me, not as part of the PDA, but within post office counters. So Mina had obviously asked her to have a look at the latest PDA documents that Pathway had put forward as part of their proposal to replan.
And can we look at the penultimate paragraph on that page, please? It says there, the main concern that POCL has is that it's not clear whether the right tests are in place, either as part of DIT or in the subsequent model office, to ensure the integrity of the new benefit accounting settlement and reconciliation process. Now, settlement and reconciliation process, obviously we know, is quite important, quite fundamental in terms of the work of the sub-postmaster.
Yes, and I'm pleased that we were doing the work to try to assure that and absolutely check it out.
But were you concerned about it at that stage?
I was concerned, I would have been concerned about all aspects of the programme that hadn't been running to time.
And can we go to page 3?
I think in paragraph 2 above, it shows you that we were prepared to move some, we weren't prepared, to accept some of the planning squeezing in of new functionality without it being properly tested first.
Paragraph 3, the first bullet point,
Yeah.
it says, assuring the new accounting, settlement and reconciliation end-to-end process works.
Yeah.
This is a POCL must-have, and yet it is not clear how POCL is going to know before the go-ahead is given that the new process will work. Again, that must have been quite a concern at that stage.
It was a concern, and if you note the timing of this, which is...
It's the 6th of May 1997.
If you note the timing of this, there was a PDA report, which I thought was, a PA report, which I thought was fair game, but one of the documents you gave me yesterday showed my draft reaction to a draft, which said it had some gaps. So, but it was fair game for much of it. And then it also was about the time, I know you questioned, I saw that, you questioned John Roberts yesterday about the lessons learnt exercise he'd asked, which was July, I think, so 2 months after this. And I gave him that, as he called it, I think, a warts and all.
Absolutely. And should we turn to that? That's poll 000285593.
We haven't scripted this, have we? So that's good. Yeah.
This is your covering letter.
This is a covering letter to my colleagues on the Counter Executive Committee, because it was important that they knew about it, because it involved actions across the team.
And can we look at page 7, please? Can we look at the left-hand side of page 7? Sorry, it's the page before that. Thank you. Would it be perfect? This is a passage that I took John Roberts to yesterday. There's a need to review enabling organisations, and it says further down there, concerns about the end-to-end. I think that's the page. No, sorry, it's over the page, sorry. It's the page before then. It's page internal page 5. Certainly page 7 on my document.
Is this the?
There we go. Yep, it's that.
What's the key improvement lessons it's under? Then I could.
We need a better idea of connections to our other new systems. I think this is something that you spoke about earlier.
Yes.
Is the concern that's being raised there that there weren't proper systems in place for POCL to understand why Horizon might not be working properly?
I think that what became clear in this candid report from me was that I said it was a learning exercise for us in becoming an automated organisation. I think I say that somewhere in here. And one of those things was that we had a number of projects in train that weren't to do with Horizon, either existing systems or back office systems that were going through their own change. And what we didn't have in one place was something to join those all up and plug our Horizon into it, if I can put it simply like that. And so sadly, I can see that most of the actions fall to me.
Well, absolutely. Can we look at the, so it's the top document that's shown on screen, and it's the bottom 2 bullet points on the right-hand side.
Yeah.
End-to-end testing procedures will need to be transferred from the PDA and supplemented as release planning migrates back to POCL after the system is accepted. A process for live trial acceptance is being devised to ensure collective ownership across POCL functions. So that's your name on the right-hand side.
I mean, it is also after the system's accepted on the penultimate point, which of course it hadn't been and wasn't until late 99.
And is that penultimate point saying that once the PDA has finished its work, that end-to-end testing will need to be assured at the post office end?
Yes, for the post office systems. not for the DSS systems,
Yes.
which is the other part of the end-to-end for some services, obviously.
And the final bullet point, live trial acceptance, the processes were going to be post office processes.
Yes, and as it says there, to ensure collective ownership across POCL functions.
Now, your name is on the right-hand side.
Yeah.
Does that mean that you were responsible for taking those forward?
I was responsible you see it says Paul ATSG.
Yes.
That's the Automation Transformation Steering Group, another fantastic name. I think it became known as Harnessing Technology in post offices later on, but it was basically, I was asked by Stuart to set that up and bring together the project managers of these various technical projects to be able to talk to each other and create a milestone plan that ensured they joined up. I mean, at this time, we was in the early stages of year 2000, for example.
So as things went forward, who would have been taking that forward?
After I'd left, that in early '99, that would have fallen within the remit, I imagine. I'd be certain about this. You need to ask of Dave Miller, I would have thought.
And can we
Dave Smith was the program manager, the guy who apparently put up that interesting slide yesterday.
Can we go on one page after the bottom page here? So it's internal 7, but it's my page 9. And we have there on the left-hand corner, this is again something I raised with Mr. Roberts, robustness is being raised as an issue there. Mm-hmm. And on the right-hand side, collective nerve needed to ensure no compromise on quality for sake of speed and to retain programme focus. That's something that you've told us about already today.
Yes.
But was there some pressure then? I mean, why would this need to be said?
Because I think, remember, I'm talking both to this is a report essentially for the John Roberts Counter Automation Steering Group, and I've copied it to my Counter Executive Committee colleagues, and therefore all the main players within the post office or within post office counters are recipients of this. And I just wanted us to be clear between us that we remained committed to not being expedient for the sake of speed, given the delays.
Were there some who just wanted it to happen quickly?
No, I don't think so. Not within the post office. No, but in managing the disappointment of the slippages within post office and post office counters, there were other stakeholders to manage as well, including government ministers who had been shown timetables before. You referred me yesterday to the Benefits Agency POCL Memorandum of Understanding, which predated the awarding of the contract. And within that, there was an ambition to have completed the rollout, as far as DSS were concerned, by the end of '99. And we were nowhere near that.
So were there external pressures to speed up?
Or to take a different approach? I mean, I think I said elsewhere, and it may be at the bottom, I can't remember, at the bottom of this document.
Perhaps we could look at internal page 8, it's page 10 here, the DSS
political issues. And as my note to Stuart, as I was flying off to Germany that day, said after I'd met George McCorkle for dinner the night before, my benefit agency equivalent, I think the slippage after the replan had dented confidence within DSS, and you asked me about our relationship with the benefits agency yesterday. Probably more DSS than BA, not quite the same thing now. Different culture than us, and much more command and control much less open. You can see from the style of this document, this is a very open document. It underpins we had something called business excellence, total quality culture, where no denial was a characteristic, and putting the customer first was a characteristic at that time. DSS wouldn't have thought like that. But they always, I think, had the ACT option in the background, and their systems, which not me but the NAO said weren't ready for purpose at the beginning of were getting more fit for purpose.
The threat of termination that's mentioned on that document, though, that must have had some impact on getting the job done quickly.
Well, clearly we agreed there's documents that we agreed with the benefits agency through the Programme Delivery Authority and its lawyers to put a breach notice in November 97, I think, from memory, so after this, but also committed to keep working on the programme while that was put forward. You heard John yesterday say we had a difference of opinion about whether to follow that up later on with a cure notice, a 13-week cure notice. There'll be lawyers here who know better than me what a cure notice is, I'm afraid. But I think it was essentially putting them on notice that unless they didn't get done this in 13 weeks, there'll be termination.
During that summer, there were still some significant technical problems. I'm going to take you to a document, POL 000-28311. That's a Programme Delivery Authority board meeting, the 21st of August, 1997. And can we go to page 4? That's paragraph 2.1.4.6. And it says there, the third sentence, POCL also had problems with testing, especially electronic point of sale system. Pathway reported that their testing strategy was under review and agreed to pay particular attention to EPOS.
Good. I notice it's Mr. Coombs to action, and Mr. Coombs was someone that Pathway brought in to strengthen their technical team. He was the ICL technical director at the time, and I think he was parachuted into Pathway.
And can we go over the page to paragraph 2.3? There you highlight that more emphasis was being placed on live trial and quality rather than speed. So that's again the very point that you made in the earlier document. Again, there seems to be a looming pressure coming from somewhere for speed. Would you agree with that?
Not from us. I mean, we had what we thought were a set of committed timetables after a replan in March 97, and they were slipping. What do you do about that is the question, and so we had another replan, and we questioned severely from the documents, some of which you've just seen, about whether Pathway's proposals to catch up in terms of release software were really credible, and we wouldn't have agreed to something that was intrinsically risky technically as far as we were concerned before it was bottomed out. DSS, as I said, had promised their business case, as I understood it belatedly from documents I've seen and from the NAO report, to remind myself back in that, had predicated to the Treasury something like 15 million a month on fraud savings as the basis of their business case, in order to, once it had been rolled out and once it was working. So clearly they had, the delays were hurting every party financially. There was no winner here. ICL weren't getting paid because of PFI structures. We were having our competitive position damaged. We were disappointing sub-postmasters and our staff whom we said this is coming, but it's going. But so there wasn't, severe pressure to get this done, but we had to, as I say, hold our collective nerve to ensure that what we put out was good enough.
But there's document after document saying we need to emphasise quality rather than speed, and I just wondered, somebody must have been asking for speed rather than quality.
Well, as I said, I'm trying to be honest, really honest and candid, and to the best of my recollection. There was undoubtedly pressure on Benefits Agency from DSS and the Treasury. I would imagine the Treasury, I don't know, I'm speculating on that. They were pretty close, DSS and Treasury. They're a big spending department, so they would be. They would have been saying, what's going on here? Why can't we do ACT instead?
You mentioned the PA consulting report, and that was in October of 1997. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that.
Oh, I thought it was a bit earlier than that, I'm sorry.
Well, the report itself was October 1997, and that's actually one of the questions that I'm going to begin with, which is, did you input into the report before it was published?
I did, because Peter came round and saw most parties from within the because it was commissioned by the PDA from Alec Wiley, so all parties involved. I think you reminded me actually from the document I saw last night, thank you, about my initial reaction to it, was that one of my queries was I don't think he talked to enough people within post office counters to get a fully rounded view from people like who were involved in the automation steering or the finance people, although we asked him to do it. But you'd asked Peter about that yourself.
You said at paragraph 63 of your witness statement that the PA consulting report of October 1997 found no fundamental technical issues with the system. That sounds a little bit like the comment we heard yesterday, not fundamentally flawed. Did you have lesser concerns?
Well, there's a load of lessons that were emerging, and I tried to list those in that July report for all parties. But I could only I could observe what was happening with other people and give my opinion on it. I could only action what I thought was necessary within Post Office, or recommend action.
Can we look at poll 000900015?
But you're right that we did rely on that it could work. It wasn't technically, intrinsically flawed.
Well, absolutely, and this is precisely a document that I'm going to take you to. Again, this is one of those new documents, so if you need
this is the one I was referring to.
Yes.
There you go.
So, if we look at that document, it's the last page of that document, and it's a letter from you to Peter Copping.
Yeah.
And it seems like an important point. So you're saying there,
what date is this, please, Mr. Blake?
This is the 8th of September 1997, okay. So shortly before publication. Publication was in October.
I see. Thank you.
2 points do occur. First, on the basic technical question of whether there's a basic ICL pathway design flaw or not, combined with the sheer scale of what we're trying to do, makes the programme inherently unstable. The report is silent on this explicitly at the moment, though it implies the design is feasible. I wonder if people who worked on the initial technical evaluation, including, if I recall correctly, a PA consultant, could help me here. So this seems to be you drilling down on precisely the issue that we were addressing yesterday, that people are focusing on fundamentally flawed.
We wanted to know because, as I said, we had a culture. I don't know what it is like today in Post Office Limited, but we had a culture of no denial. We wanted to know. If you didn't know, what could you do about it?
And instability is perhaps, would you agree, it would be a better test than fundamentally flawed, if you're agreeing a system?
I mean, I think my language was a bit, imprecise there. Unstable could mean a number of things, couldn't it? and I can't remember exactly what I meant there. I didn't know if it meant undoable or it might fall over. It could mean either of those things.
I think fundamentally flawed you would understand to be doesn't really work.
Yeah,
whereas
yes, it's fundamentally flawed. It's the inherently bit. You know, inherently implies that, or to me, at any rate, that it would be difficult to fix, and it might be something structural and systematic. If there are technical issues and flaws that can be addressed and tested, that's a different matter.
I mean, would it be fair to say that you're asking there, is it unreliable even if it works?
I don't think I had that in mind when I wrote it. It's the truth.
Were those questions that were being asked at the time?
Trying to remember honestly. We certainly would have, unreliable would have been really manifested during a live trial, if it was unreliable or not. And we hadn't gone into live trial other than a few offices at that stage. So it would have been difficult to know. CF, my earlier answer about some testing you can't do until you actually, you can do all the testing in the way, it's like playing a football match, you can do all the training, but you have to actually be in a match to see if it works.
So it's the acceptance and the testing.
Yeah, the
trial.
Live trial had to come before acceptance. That was a very fundamental stuff. And the issues that came out of live trial or around live trial in the other forms of testing would have been logged and then addressed to pathway, and the seriousness of them, either something that make it unreliable or the incidence of them, the frequency of them, would have determined their seriousness and their prioritisation to get fixed before moving on, to my mind.
Do you think you got an answer to that point on whether it was inherently unstable?
I think the October one report that came out said it wasn't fundamentally flawed, and I took that as including in that.
So your understanding of fundamentally flawed would include whether something was unstable?
Whether it was reliable to work, because if it was fundamentally flawed, it wouldn't.
Let's look at the report itself. That is a POL 000289092. And can we look at page 7, please? So, although, as you've said, the finding is that the system isn't fundamentally flawed, there were at least some concerns, both in relation to POCL and in relation to Pathway at that stage, that were raised by PA Consulting. Would you agree with that?
Yes, we did. All three organisations got some lessons to learn. And
if we look at those 3 bullet points at the top,
yeah.
And actually, can we look at the whole, the top half of the page, including the paragraph that begins our key concern? So there are some concerns raised in those bullet points, and then it goes on to say our key concern is that the skills required for many of the new senior posts are, in our opinion, not those we would have expected to find as part of POCL core competencies. So there are concerns there, it seems, about a lack of skills within the post office. Is that right?
Lack of those skills, particularly true, as it says, to implementation, management and contract and service. I wouldn't have agreed with him about contract management. I think contract management, he's talking about a technical contract and how you manage that. Service management, I would have agreed, because I said earlier on we were learning to be an automated organisation, and an automated organisation needs a central service management function typically. We knew that. We were trying to address it. It was complicated by the fact that the PFI contract was let out. So some of that service management, as Mr. Scipione points out, was contracted to Pathway to provide in terms of help desk, support desk, system desk, incident logging, all that stuff. But you still needed someone to be able to manage that provider.
And the third of those bullet points, they concern EPOS. In the longer term, there's the issue of developing POCL requirements for EPOS and the supporting computer applications. We understand there's much still to do here, which will require additional resource. EPOS we heard about earlier this morning, didn't we?
We
At
did.
an early stage, there hadn't been enough thinking about EPOS. And again, in October 1997, there were concerns about there being much still to do in relation to EPOS.
I agree with that. There was still much to do, and it's not a defence or an excuse. It's not what I'm here for, but it's the prioritisation on the benefits service, which could have put the whole system in jeopardy, or the whole project in jeopardy. We seem to think we should get that right before moving on. We understood it needed to be done, and we did put extra resource on.
Can we look at page 8, and it's M3.4 on that page. The report then goes on to talk about concerns with Pathway, and it's over the page that I would like to look at. And it's the first paragraph. Much of our review at Pathway has focused on the robustness of the technical solution, since this has become a significant concern for the sponsors and Pathway, whilst we've been able to obtain satisfactory answers to all our questions, in particular regarding the way security requirements will be incorporated and on scalability and performance. There must continue to be reservations in all these areas until the final design is baselined and then realised. It is also important to note the dependency for technical success on Isha, which is a small Boston-based software house and the source of the Riposte messaging software, which is at the heart of the system. Now, again, that's something we spoke about earlier that was a concern years before.
He's repeating what we knew, that Esho, they were dependent on Esho, and what were they doing about it to put it right. I've been trying to remember that, actually. I honestly can't recall what extra resources or what actions Fujitsu took or Pathway took to. I can't remember if they bought Escher in, or bought them out, or got them in, but they certainly put extra technical resource to manage them.
Can we look at your statement, which describes replans that took place around this time? And it's WITN 04030100.
Paragraph, please.
Paragraph 68, page 24.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think this is talking about this particular time. This was my understanding of the technical difficulties with Horizon at the time, but I would also add that those post offices to whom the service had been rolled out largely reported that it was going okay. They did not raise many technical difficulties, and indeed many post offices who did not yet have access to the system were saying that they wanted it. Now, a reading of that paragraph might be that it contains quite a few caveats in it. At that stage, it would only have been a small number of post offices who had Horizon installed. I think less than 200.
Yeah, about 205, 215.
And there was also limited functionality at that
Limited
stage.
functionality. Yeah, both of those are true, and I tried to express that. Forgive me if I didn't.
No, absolutely. But if some postmasters were having some technical difficulties at that stage, when it was still a small project, would that have been a concern?
Yes, but my memory of that is that the nature of the technical difficulties weren't the ones that were being experienced apparently during rollout, around the lack of balancing and that sort of stuff.
So what was your understanding of the
I think it was things like screens freezing occasionally. I might be wrong. There might be one or two. I can't be certain, but I do know that I can remember Dave. You'd be able to ask Dave Miller. Dave Miller having a meeting with many of the sub-postmasters who were in the trials or going around there, and asking them the direct question. I think it's in the Federation, on a Federation document, saying, so given all this, would you want us to roll it out further, with a resounding yes? So that isn't to say we were complacent. I wouldn't want to give that impression, we weren't. But the whole purpose of doing the live trial was, as I said earlier, was to try to get those experiences from those who were actually using the system and get some feedback into that.
Could I ask for the witness statement to be brought back on screen on the same page, if possible? So it's WITN. Thank you very much. Can we look at paragraph 69? There you say the natural forum to raise these difficulties would have been at the meetings between the NFSP and the network director. Who was the network director? Was that Jonathan Evans?
Yes, it was.
So you would have expected problems to have been raised by the NFSP at that stage, is that right?
The NFSP, as John said yesterday, certainly weren't in the post office's pocket. They were vociferous if they thought there was an issue, and if there had been substantive. Well, I imagine I'm speculating. I imagine if there had been substantive complaints by those sub-postmasters who had used the system because of these sort of issues, I'm sure they would have been alerted to it, and they would have been not slow in coming forward with those.
But the number of post offices at that stage was very small.
I was saying, yeah.
What did you see as the role of the NFSP in that regard, then?
Well, clearly they were with us, bringing together sub-postmasters to get their reaction. I think the meeting I alluded to before, which I read about when Dave Miller went, I think there was an NFSP executive member there for that. The NFSP had been involved early on in the genesis of the Horizon project, against the threat of ACT and therefore the threat to the national network. They clearly would have been representing their members there fiercely to ministers.
Do you think the NFSP were given much of a role at that stage?
Given?
Well, did they have much of a role, much of a say in what was going on?
They were kept informed. They went to meetings with Pathway. I think during the bidding process, I think all three bidders set up stalls at a National Federation of Sub-Postmaster Conference to show these sort of things. We hadn't gone, and we didn't think about that till I was in the process of setting up Post Office Limited. We didn't think about putting them on the board, for example, or giving them a non-exec role. I think that would have been a step too far for us at that point.
Can we look at poll 000282137, please? Now, this is a very early meeting, so it's some years before the period that I'm talking about.
Yes, this is in the very genesis. This is just before, just to give context to this, the MOU you showed me yesterday, which was 95, there were earlier non-legal versions of that to which this was a contributor.
And can we look at the penultimate paragraph of that and the final sentence of that penultimate paragraph? NFSP involvement would be kept to a minimum. Do you think that there was an attempt to keep NFSP involvement to a minimum?
No, I don't. I'm surprised about that. Did I write those notes?
That's a minute of the...
Yeah, I wonder who wrote them. for example, Andrew Scarborough, no, that's not true then. I was going to say he was the guy who dealt with the Fed, but probably wasn't at that point. But no, I don't. We did engage with the Federation around those issues, but there were boundaries. There had to be boundaries. They were a trade organisation representing people, and we took them seriously because they were our people too.
Do you think some people took a view that they shouldn't be getting involved in the technical side of things?
Well, I don't think they had technical capability, but certainly we were keen to include sub-postmasters and tell the Federation about the user testing.
I'm going to move on to November 1997. And that's a month after the PA consulting report. And can we look at poll 000-28599? This is an interim business continuity status report for the period 20th to the 26th of November 1997, and you were a recipient of this report.
Was this one of the new ones, Mr. Blake, or one of the old ones?
I believe it's an old one.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
I'm only going to take you to a paragraph of it. Can we look at page 2, paragraph 1? About halfway down that paragraph, it says the primary purpose is to identify any issues, actual or potential, that might give rise to considering a suspension of the Congo 4 rollout or regression from ICL pathway services. Do you remember the Congo 4 rollout? It's
I will probably get this wrong because my memory is failing me now from 20 or however long ago. Congo, I wouldn't be able to give you the detail of what Congo 4 rollout. There was Congo 4, Congo 5, Congo 4 Plus. We knew it also as 1C, which I think it said before. But I think these were releases relating to other functionality other than the benefit encashment service.
At the bottom of that page, it makes clear that there are no matters that need escalating for consideration of a suspending of the Congo 4 rollout.
Okay.
But it's paragraph 3.2.1 that I'd like you to look at, and that's on page 3. Could we possibly blow up that paragraph? Thank you very much. After assurances following a previous duplicate payment, a new duplicate payment situation has occurred at Bath Road SPSO. This was due to the post office not being able to poll for 8 or 9 days. Therefore, the system was unable to identify that the original payment had already been made. Now, we heard from Mr. Roberts yesterday that he wasn't really involved. His evidence was that he wasn't significantly involved in this kind of level of detail, individual branch level of detail. But this is something that would have been brought to your attention at the time, that level of detail.
What date was this, please?
It is November 1997.
97, okay. Yeah, it would have been then, yeah.
What do you understand by that paragraph?
I understand that there seemed to be an issue, as it says, not being able to poll that ICL would need to fix.
Can we go over the page, please, to 3.4.1? Can we look at 3.4. Thank you very much. One of the new PMSR reports introduced at the beginning of Release 1C does not appear to be working correctly. It did not pick up the Bath Road duplicate payment and report. It is an unmatched encashment. Pathway have stated that they will seek an urgent fix to this. Can we look at the paragraph below, the 2 paragraphs below? Another concern is that one of the transactions involved in this incident didn't come through to ABED and wasn't reported on the CBOS report. Pathway aimed to address this as part of the fix being applied to the above. This has a double impact on transaction processing. First, it creates an error against cash account. Second, settlement with the benefits agency is based on an incorrect sum. Pathway are looking to manually amend the CBOS report as an interim measure. This has an impact on POCL accounting. Pausing there, do you understand that second bullet?
I don't know what a CBOS report is. Honestly, I don't.
Were you aware that Pathway was able to manually amend certain things in the branch accounts?
Well, from this, not that I remember, but from this, it's in black and white, so I must have read it at the time. But I don't remember that, and it would have been with Pathway and the PDA to fix.
It says this has an impact on POCL accounting. Do you know what that meant there?
Well, presumably the accounting would have had to have been adjusted to correct the error.
So if there's a manual amendment, it would have an impact on post office accounting.
Yeah. I don't know if he says Pathway are looking to amend. I don't know if they did. So I can't comment on that.
And the paragraph below, the above has been registered with operational service management, but there's a growing concern given the limited functionality and few online offices.
Yeah.
So in that period, were you concerned about errors during the limited functionality and few online office period?
I don't remember it as I said earlier, as a large issue or a big material issue that was being brought to our attention all the time. Clearly, this is an example. It's an operational service management report which goes to me and others as part of the PDA board. And when the PDA board met, we would have asked what had been done about it and decided. I don't think it's not sent to me to action, as it were.
Would somebody in particular action that?
Can you show me who the...
Yes, can we look at the first
page, please, again? Because I don't remember this report. Yeah, it would have been... It would have been... the person who would have been tasked with fixing it with ICL would have been Peter Crown. He's the guy in charge of the PDA at this point. Bearing in mind the PDA existed and Horizon Programme Board hadn't been moved yet to Horizon, or was in the process of doing so, I think. Probably it's the last best year.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to 1998, the spring to autumn of 1998. Can you briefly tell us how your role changed in that period?
In the spring, autumn 98?
Yes. I think after 1997 you left. Did you leave the PDA board?
No, I think what happened was the PDA board, the PDA started to dissolve. And that's part of the recommendations. As John said yesterday, we brought more things back in-house. There was still a residual PDA dealing with contractual matters and that sort of things where there was a joint contract. But we brought a lot of it back into a new Horizon Programme director, which was Dave Miller. So my role changed really to more like a commercial strategic rather than delivery. Of course, I needed to be kept appraised of where we were because clearly there's the things are iterative to some extent.
So at that stage, was David Miller more focused on the technical matters, and you were
on the delivery, including the technical matters. He would have been resourced up. We resourced him up. He would have reported directly on those matters to the managing director.
And your role at that stage, you saw as more strategic?
More strategic, commercial, I suppose, if there had been major contract renegotiations that came out. But everything then, of course, was in hiatus during, as John I hadn't heard that him use that expression before, the year lost. In 98, when Benefits Agency and DSS basically called time, and the Treasury Working Group was set up, etc., etc. So Dave Miller was trying to keep the programme going with his benefits agency under a guy called Vince Gaskell, who was on there, was doing that for the benefits agency, if you like, and we were more involved really in trying to cope with the various reports, consultancies, and people sent to us by the Treasury Working Group and give what we thought was good advice.
Can we look at poll 000388828, please? And this is moving to March 1998, March and April.
Yes, this was the first Bird and Bird report.
Do you know whose handwriting that is on the front page? It doesn't matter if you don't recognise it.
I'd have thought it was Dave Miller's, but it says Dave, so it's confused me. I don't, therefore.
Can we look at page 5 and paragraph 310? Again, is this the same? I don't know if this is the same handwriting or if this is handwriting that you recognise at all.
No, you gave me a document yesterday which had annotations on it which looks similar to this.
You don't need to be a handwriting expert.
I don't know.
If it's not yours, then that's
I don't
sufficient.
know. Dave would have had a number, people working for him. I imagine it's one of those.
So there are some concerns set out there. I'm going to very briefly summarise them. There were some concerns about paperwork things, so agreements to agree, contracting, authority responsibilities, etc. The second bullet point, security controls, security requirements. The third paragraph, training requirements and solutions. That seems to be crossed out. I'm not sure if you're able to assist as to why that would be crossed out. The fourth, problems with the post office estate, availability of ISDN connections.
Yeah, I've mentioned some of those before, haven't I?
Yes, and then it's the next paragraph that I'd like to look at. The pathway systems interface to BA and POCL systems. Some of these are new systems being developed in parallel with pathway. Others are being modified to include the interfaces. There have been a number of issues with the interface systems, particularly with the BA CAPS program and the POCL reference data system. Does it say, it may say infer culpability or something on the right-hand side, but again, if it's not your...
Honestly, I couldn't tell you who that was.
What were you aware of POCL reference data issues at that stage?
I know we had to get our reference data more systematic in order to be able to cope with an automated world, but I wasn't aware of, at that time, I don't remember at any rate, reference data issues being a particular interface problem at that time. I've read subsequent reports that you've sent me the inquiry sent me rather, that talks about reference data issues.
Would you have received these
Scipione.
Bird and Bird documents?
I think I would have received this Bird and Bird document at that time. I think I referred to it in my witness statement, so
Yes.
I might have done. It's confusing because this is Project Mentors, and they did a separate one out of the blue, really, at the end of '99 as well.
So who were Project Mentors, very, very briefly?
I think they were consultancy, an IT consultancy, or claim they were. I think they were run by a professor.
We may see that in due course.
That obviously Bird and Bird, who were the joint contract solicitors for the PDA, knew.
Can we look at poll 000 69096? And that's a meeting of the Counter Automation Steering Group on the 27th of March 1998. I think you'll need to go over the page, but it's clear that that was sent to you as the first page that we skipped over. And you would have received that because you're named as being present at the meeting as well.
So this is the minutes of this meeting, I see. Yep, thank you.
Can we look at page 3? And the top 2 paragraphs there, it says, about halfway down the first one, POCL would not seek to delay Pathway's April 1999 rollout date, but before accepting the system would want to be certain it was working correctly. Work on EPOS was continuing, and Pathway had indicated that whilst it could provide a system which met the contract, its lack of robustness could generate high level of errors within POCL. This was being investigated, although it was difficult to quantify how the system would work until after it had been installed and was operational. That all sounds quite serious at that stage, doesn't it? Especially in relation to EPOS.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't say, though, that we would have wanted to have let the system roll out, not in my view anyhow, without the acceptance incidents including on EPOS being cleared.
So it's similar to the evidence that you gave earlier, that although you knew that there were problems, it would be in the rollout that kind of thing might...
Yeah, I mean, the rollout, before going into rollout, Dave Miller, I think, had a system of acceptance instances which he categorised high, medium and low, and there were a certain number that could be allowed, but none that were high. And I would have imagined the EPOS one was high, but that acceptance happened after my time, so I can't really comment on that.
But the reference to high level of errors there sounds concerning.
Well, it says could generate high levels of errors. It sounds like the way, this is a report by Dave, by the sound of it, and it said Pathway itself might have thought that the way it was doing it could generate high levels of error. So that is a cause of concern.
If we look back at the first
clearly
page...
that wasn't acceptable.
Sorry, the second page. The attendees of that meeting, John Roberts was chairman of that committee.
He was.
Would you have expected him to take that kind of information to the board level?
You need to ask John that.
But was your expectation at that time that those kinds of details would have been raised at board level?
I would have respected John's judgment about what he took or didn't take to the board. This was, as he said yesterday, a extra piece of governance on the board that he included he and some of his colleagues on that, the executive colleagues. Richard Close is the finance director, Jerry Cope is the group strategy director, Stuart Sweetman the managing director for Counters, and me and Dave from within Counters, in order to more closely monitor the project.
I think you've said that acceptance criteria would be an important factor in dealing with those kinds of problems.
Yes.
Who would you see as responsible for that?
Well, the acceptance criteria, from what I've read recently, ICL were proposing different acceptance criteria towards the end of 98, 99, as I understand it. And that would have fallen to Dave Miller primarily to deal with at that point, not me. So I can't comment on those and didn't comment on those. And those acceptance criteria, which would have then folded in the second half of 99 after the ministerial decision, would have led, I imagine, to the acceptance criteria being modified as part of the renegotiation of the heads of terms between ICL and Post Office. And I don't know who had signatory authority within the Post Office for that. I'm afraid.
You don't know who had signatory authority, but who would you have expected to have been taken responsibility for
The acceptance criteria.
acceptance criteria?
Well, I'd have imagined Dave with taking legal advice and surrounding himself with people who had experience of the programme and taking IT advice and others. I'm sure he would have done this. I trust Dave.
David Miller.
David Miller, yeah.
I'm going to move on now to the Treasury Working Group. Now, you weren't part of that group. It was, I think, Jonathan Evans.
Jonathan represented councils, although I gave inputs to it.
Do you think that the Post Office provided enough technical expertise to those kinds of groups?
Well, there was a panel of technical experts working for the Treasury Working Group alongside KPMG who were doing the overall evaluation. And they came and talked to various people within the business. So it was really responding to them rather than being us saying, here's our technical people, could you do it? They were asking us a lot of questions about the impact of cancellation or termination of the contract in part or in full. And as you heard from John yesterday, the variations to that theme got wilder and wilder and more radical at times.
We heard earlier about the PA report, which said that there was at least some lack of expertise within the Post Office when it came to those technical matters. Do you agree with that?
I think we needed to improve our core competence in that. I would agree with that. And you could never say you've got enough capability. I don't think that would be arrogant to say so. I think we had sufficient expertise to manage the programme, given the PFI nature of it.
Do you think Jonathan Evans, going into that Treasury Working Group, had enough understanding of the technical details?
He would have come back and asked us about that or had provided briefings if he needed to. But he was there primarily around, well, he's a good guy, but also he was the network director, and a lot of the modelling being done was on the impact on the network.
Do you think that those with technical expertise were given enough say on whether the Post Office should remain committed to that project at that time?
I see. I don't know. John answered yesterday, I think, that we talked about the options, and Jonathan did it at the working group about retendering, if necessary. And that sounds easy, but isn't. You know, given the situation, you had to postulate different scenarios. And indeed, I think there's a report in the bundle where we asked for a peer, as well as asking for an external view, we asked for a peer review run by our own finance director, who was pretty fiercely independent, to say if Benefits Agency withdrew from this, what was the best option? And his conclusion was the least worst option was to carry on with the project.
Let's look at a letter or a note from Mina Rigo. That's Pol 000-28649. It's a document of the 8th of July of 1998. Can you just tell us who was Mina Rigo?
Mina was one of my direct reports, and she was working on. She was the Horizon Development Manager, I think her title was. She had a commercial background and a general management one.
Penultimate paragraph there.
Oh, this is deep pink, yeah.
We have to get the message across very clearly to officials/ministers that we're not a pawn in the game between DSS desire to exit and Treasury/DTI desire to prop up ICL, and that if BA cease the payment card, we reserve our right to make our own decision on continuation/extension of the contract or termination, and this would depend on our satisfaction of the 2 points above.
Can you remind me what the 2 points above were?
Yes, absolutely. Can we just have a quick look?
I see. Yeah.
What did you understand by pawn in the game?
You haven't met Mina, but she's a very direct person, and it's probably not the language I would use. But what she was trying to say there is that the Post Office and POCL couldn't be the fall guy for DSS's desire to exit and the Treasury DTI desire to do so, but put any of the losses that might result on that onto Post Office rather than ICL. I mean, I think the background to this, which I must just mention, if I may, this was 8th of July 98, so this is going into the Treasury Working Group. And you will know that the KPMG report, eventually published, showed that the clear best value for money was to continue with the benefit payment card, but on an extended rollout. The only loser in that scenario was Benefits Agency, and therefore they resisted it tooth and nail.
Did the Post Office come up with a credible alternative strategy to the payment card?
We talked and considered and agreed that we would migrate to a smart card, which you recall was in our minds at the outset, and indeed even appears in the 1995 MOU as the system would be able to migrate to it. But it depends what you do with that smart card, and it depends on the rate of business you lose at the same time. You have to think about our post offices and our customers here. If, as John said yesterday, it wasn't just a technical decision, it was a rounded decision. At 98, 99, less than 25% of DSS claimants chose to have their payments made by ACT. So it wasn't, even when it was available to them, they were still choosing to come to post offices. We were determined that that customer choice should remain in one way or another. So the credible alternative we tried to put up under one of the option 2 variants when DSS had dug their heels in with Treasury backing to some extent, saying they wanted to terminate their part of the deal, was that we were prepared to go to a smart card that would enable banking services in some way, shape or form, provided that BA continued its managed transition on ACT over a number of years and continue to pay post office, and therefore we could pay postmasters and our people some amount for that card.
Do you think that the Post Office weren't thinking of a simpler plan, though?
Such as?
Well, there was some criticism, certainly in some internal government reports. I don't need to take you to them because you won't have seen them at the time. But they were critical of the Post Office's lack of a robust business plan at that stage.
I don't disagree with that. I take issue with that. It's very easy for people who don't run things to make up, comment on those things. The enablers that would have had to be in place then as now for that network to survive was that a universal banking product would have had to be developed. One suggestion from within the Treasury was that the Post Office could become a bank to do that, which was unacceptable because of all the regulatory risks. We sort of sold our bank off 10 years earlier in Gyro Bank to privatisation. We would have had to make enabling arrangements with banks to do that, and the government would have had to do that because the banks wouldn't have been rushing to take on a lot of unbanked people who you wouldn't have seen. So, and we had a plan also to provide what we called network banking services, which we then went on to develop for banks as they closed branches to come and do stuff. That would have also required an automated network. It would have required further releases to enable things like debit cards to be done, probably an ATM type network. So it wasn't a quick fix, is what I would say.
Can we look at poll 000-28644? And that's a letter to you from David Sibic, who was the Director of Posts at the DTI at the time.
Yeah.
And that's August 1998.
Yeah.
The bottom of that first page, he's asking, if benefits payment card were dropped, what technology would the post office want? And could simpler technology be used? I mean, it seems there that the post office are being given an off-ramp to the Horizon project if they wanted it. Would you
Well,
agree?
he's asking for a scenario, and we gave him that. I think it's in the bundle.
Did the post office ever come up with a simpler system as an alternative?
I'd like to know what he meant by that. Such as, what is the simpler system? We had a simple system that was called paper-based payment methods, and that clearly was unacceptable and not modern. The type of technology to enable us to be competitive in the future would have had to should have built on the infrastructure that was being developed and being rolled out at that point, and included the option then to upgrade it to more of a banking type solution.
I think a witness has said that effectively a tank was built when all you needed was a car or something along those lines.
Did they?
What would your position on that be?
Well, if we'd have started again without the benefits card at that time and retendered, we would have obviously had a different type of specification at that point that would have taken advantage of the latest technology without all the work that had been done on the infrastructure to start with. It wouldn't have taken away some of the earlier ones. There was also a quite serious point about timing, which the Treasury tried to ignore, which was there were serious procurement law issues.
I'm going to take you to a document very briefly. It's Poll 000-38842. It's again, it's about a meeting that took place with David Sibic, and it's a question that I'm asked to ask you, and I'll just ask it very quickly. It relates to paragraph 2. It seems as though from paragraph 2 there's a proposal from the DTI for a joint spokesperson, and it says this was rejected by Paul Rich. Do you remember that? And if so,
I do remember it, and I remember the background to it.
Are you briefly able to explain?
Hamish Sanderson was the Bird and Bird lawyer who had acted for the BA and Pockle in the PDA, and he had, for example, we think he had commissioned that last Project Mentors report in '99, which remarkably and coincidentally came at the same time as DSS were considering whether they withdrew or not. And we thought he was in conflict. We had advice because we didn't agree on the way forward, and we had advice from Slaughters to Treasury solicitors and to our own solicitor that it was a clear, you can remember the partner at Slaughters giving a very clear indication that Hamish would have been in conflict.
So was your concern with Bird and with the Project Mentors you've just described, were you concerned that they were adopting a DSS line? I'll be honest about this, and I may, if I misremember, you'll have to forgive me, and you could ask Sarah Graham, but I don't remember jointly commissioning the second Bird and Bird report, which, when I saw it, was I think on New Year's Eve, was sent to George McCorkle with me as a copy, which I then passed on to Dave Miller because clearly it was a technical issue, where they claimed there was insufficient requirements analysis of the benefits agency solution, which was a fundamental point. But I thought it was interesting that they never raised that in their report a year before. And we'll get to that document shortly. Just in relation to this document, did you suggest an alternative spokesman?
I can't remember.
No, that's good. Moving on to late 1998, well, we're in autumn, but let's move to November. It's poll 000288421.
Excuse me.
Mr. Rich, I should ask, are you okay to continue?
It depends for how long, because I'm afraid I'm of that age. That,
Well, I have about. I imagine I'm going to finish at past or thereabouts.
okay. I don't know if there'll be follow-up questions. So.
It's unlikely. There may be a very short follow-up for Mr. Steen.
If we can say, I'll be fine until about 22, quarter to.
Let's see how we go, and if we need a short break, then perhaps we can have a short break.
And Mr. Rich, I want to repeat that. At any moment when you feel the need for a break, you say so and we'll have one.
It's very kind, thank you. I'd rather not lose the flow if I can help it. Oh, that's
No, sure.
That's an unfortunate phrase. I'm sorry.
So the document in front of us is from David Miller about horizon
yes,
testing.
I remember that one. Yeah.
And it's that first substantive paragraph that I want to ask you about. He highlights there that my present assessment is that there are some significant problems with the way Horizon passes information through to TIP. These relate to the provision of balanced outlet cash accounts and the processing of the ensuing information via TIP. Whilst we've allocated some extra time during the Corbett review to sort out any outstanding issues, we need to be aware of a potential threat to the 14th of December date.
Yes, I'm glad he wrote that, and I'm glad he wrote that there will be a potential threat to the 14th December date rather than saying we're going ahead with them.
And I'm going to move on because there's a theme developing in November 1998. Let's look at poll 000288320. This is the Transformation Steering Group Progress Report to the 23rd of November 1998. And can we look at page 6? And there's what's called red light issues, which...
This is another document that I only saw at 2 o'clock yesterday.
Okay, well, if you need more time to consider
and this is the most substantive one, so, or one of the most substantive ones, and this is the annotations that I said I didn't recognise. So I don't know who's writing this. And it also said, I think at the beginning of it, that the meeting didn't take place.
So is this a document that you think you would have received at the time?
I can't tell. I would have received it if it was going ahead because I would have been chairing the meeting.
And if we look at the first paragraph, and that's the only paragraph I want to take you to, red light issues, Horizon system, there are major concerns about the test results emanating from model office and end-to-end.
Yeah.
The results indicate that cash accounts and transaction data delivered to POCL's downstream systems lack accounting integrity, all of which raises serious doubts about Pathway's ability to enter into the next phase of model office and end-to-end testing without some form of remedial action.
Yeah, that's basically reflecting what Dave Miller said before, isn't it?
I was going to say, even if you didn't necessarily see this at the time, were those issues that you would have been aware of?
Yeah, because Dave told us. And what does whoever wrote it said about it? May I just
if we could scroll down and highlight that.
Remedial analysis has taken place following meeting tip and reference data personnel. Remedial action is now underway. The point must be made that we will not enter the final phase of testing until we are content we have a robust set of code.
Yes. So somebody's written that at the bottom.
I think that's Dave Miller's number 2.
And who was that?
Number 2s. Could have been one of 2 people. My guess is there's a lady called Janet Topham at the time.
That paragraph on the Horizon system, though, that's background 23rd of November 1998. I'm going to now look at poll 000388829. And I think this is the controversial document, perhaps, that you were talking about from Bird and Bird.
Yeah.
Can you assist us with that handwritten note, or...?
That handwritten note is from Mina's secretary.
And Dave being...
Miller.
Thank you. Can we look at the report itself, paragraph 1? Sorry, there are a few different versions of this document. So perhaps we could take a 5-minute break now for everybody's convenience, and we can go back on in 5 minutes. Yes? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. We're back.
Yeah.
And I've found the relevant page. It's page 3 of that document, so it's POL 000388829. And this is a letter from Bird & Bird, December 1998. Can we look at that first paragraph, please? So they say, it's difficult to read, but it says, as you will see, Andrew Davis's team have documented a further specific failure by ICL Pathway to follow good industry practice in meeting the authority's requirements. And can we go to page 5? There's a letter there to yourself and George McCockle and Pat Kelsey from Bird & Bird. And that first paragraph summarises the view of Andrew Davies of Project Mentors. Can we just have a look at that first paragraph? Sorry. The quote there is quoting from Andrew's letter, deeply concerned that their findings show a serious problem with the way in which ICL Pathway have developed the system. The impact of this is likely to be that there will be failures to meet essential user requirements, causing the need for extensive rework before the system can be accepted, and potentially operational problems if the system is rolled out. Now, that's quite a concerning statement, isn't it?
It's his opinion, yeah.
I mean, the impression that it gives is that there are real concerns about Horizon.
But if you look at no, not but. I think this was commissioned on the way, if I'm correct, the benefit encashment service was developed, and the focus was on that. And the claim then by Mr. Davis was that the same must apply to all other systems, all other components. I think it also, I'm not a technical person. I'm not an IT expert and wouldn't ever aspire to be. But I think it completely ignores the fact that it was procured under private finance.
Can we go to page 6, which is the letter from Project Mentors to Hamish Sanderson, and over the page to page 7, and it's the second paragraph there. He says, our experience of systems where requirements have not been analysed satisfactorily is that the system fails to meet the user's needs. An effective acceptance test will identify many such failings, necessitating considerable rework. The result is a significant extension of time and cost required to complete the system and rollout. The alternative is to allow unacceptable processing in the operational environment with unpredictable and potentially damaging results.
Is there a question?
Well, I'm going to move on to show you the substantive report. That's at page 8. And can we go to page 11? And can we look at paragraph 1.3, scope? And the second paragraph, we have to date considered only the benefits payment system. Further work has recently started to perform a similar assessment of the approach adopted for other elements of the system, such as EPOS. Nevertheless, our findings are, in our view, sufficiently serious to bring into question the whole of Pathways design process. Moving on to page 14, paragraph 2.3.4. Again, at the bottom, of particular concern is the EPOS system. That's the second paragraph. We're informed that at a relatively early stage, Pathway wanted the authorities, principally POCL, to be involved with the design of this element. The plan was to use the rapid application development methodology to design the system. This approach was started but discontinued after some months when Pathway staff member involved left the project. The suggestion to use RAD leads us to believe that more traditional methods have not been used, and since the RAD experiment was abandoned, we have doubts whether any proper requirements analysed has been performed. Any proper requirements analysis has been performed. And on the same page, sorry, can we go to page 14? And it's 2.4.3. Sorry, that's the part that we just read, and then over the page again. Okay, now, you have addressed this in your witness statement. And you say that you were only copied into this document and that you would have passed it to others.
Yes.
And you say, my recollection is that POCL did not necessarily agree with the report as proving the system was fundamentally technically flawed. So again, that's the use of the term fundamentally flawed. I mean, were these issues raised here serious issues?
Well, clearly they're serious. They're seriously phrased. I passed this on to Dave Miller at the time. So he was clearly in the process. As I said, this is December 1998, when he was considering whether or not to authorise the further release.
So is this...
As this says, it doesn't actually analyse the EPOS system. It talks about things that started to go on the EPOS system. It talks about rapid application development in the past, which ICL did want to use, RAD it's called, and we didn't particularly want them to do that unless it had quality of outputs to do so. And as I said before, and I stick to that, the previous Project Mentors report a year or so earlier on the whole thing seemed not to address the issue of insufficient requirements analysis at all, which I find surprising. And I just note that it came out as the DSS were considering praying in aid whether or not to continue with the benefit card or not.
But coming a year later, presumably that's even more concerning because you're further down the line and these issues are being experienced.
But yes, but if it was a fundamental design flaw because of insufficient requirements analysis by ICL, that would have been apparent earlier on.
And now that they've found these issues, whose responsibility within the post office would it have been to take those forward?
To consider it?
Yeah.
Dave Miller.
And I think you said earlier that at this stage, I think you were dealing with strategic matters and David Miller was dealing with the more technical matters.
He was dealing with delivery. I was in my last, as I said earlier on, I was appointed to a role completely outside of the post office network as a when the entire group reorganised itself as the managing director of a new unit in March.
Who would you have expected David Miller to have brought this to their attention?
Maybe Stuart Sweetman, I don't know.
Do you think it was sufficiently serious to bring to the managing director's attention?
You need to ask Dave that.
If you had received it at the time, would you have brought it to the managing director's attention?
Depends in what context. As I said, I would have probably talked at length to the person authoring the report first to understand it, because, as I said, I had reservations on it, and I seriously don't remember commissioning, even though no doubt we'd have paid half of it.
Do you think that by the end of 1998 and the beginning of 1999, technical issues were being taken seriously enough within the Post Office?
They would have been taken seriously. I maintain, as I said, we would not have been expedient for the sake of speed or trying to shoehorn a solution that suited us strategically if we didn't think it could work. We relied on what you'd have seen Dave Miller's notes to us, so we knew it. No denial, as I said. I know I'm sounding like I'm in denial about this report. It's the first time probably today, but I'm irritated by it. We then, you'll no doubt, well, maybe you won't. There's another document that Dave Miller wrote in April to Vince Gaskell. That's POL 00028407, where he says the team, following these issues, the team now believe they're ready to be able to roll out. And I would have relied on Dave's judgment about that, standing from afar. As I said, I was in the process. I had a new job, but I was hanging on for a couple of months because the ministerial decision didn't come till May, so I was still giving input at that point. And then the next I saw was something in a note from Keith Hardy where I was a copy amongst many others, as I said in my witness statement, that the Post Office was beginning to roll out Horizon. That's POL 00028463.
Can we let's stay in January 1999 for now and just look at poll 000-31230. This was a report by the Post Office's Pockle's finance director.
This is the one I mentioned earlier.
Yes. And what was your involvement in this particular document?
Well, there was an earlier, we called these peer reviews. There was an earlier one done in 97 by the strategy director of Post Office. This was done by the finance director of, Post Office counters, I should say. And we asked him, as a contingency, to look at, as I said earlier, whether or not, without me getting, he'd have talked to me and given input, but without me trying to influence his decision or his analysis in any way, shape or form, really, to give an opinion on what the best way forward for Pockle would have been if this scenario occurred.
Can we look at page 2, paragraph 2.5 and 2.6? Even on the basis of protecting benefit payments, the go, no-go decision is extremely finely balanced, with neither option being fully satisfactory for Pockle. Proceeding means full commitment to an automation route and a partner, neither of which are ideal in the context of realising the new counters vision. but not proceeding would so delay the building of automated capability and undermine the business's credibility internally and externally as to put the vision at significant risk of becoming undeliverable.
I think I said earlier it was the least worst option.
Several senior managers close to the project, but not principal negotiators, whose judgment I respect, express significant reservations about the risks of proceeding. These centre on their continuing doubt about the ability of ICL to deliver a satisfactory product, the absence of transparency in the PFI contract, the risk that ICL's financial fragility will endure throughout the project, with the possibility of repeated claims on the Post Office for extra contributions, which, by then having no alternative, it will be unable to resist, and doubts about POCL's own ability to give it the focus essential for success.
Yes, none of that is new news, though, is it really? I mean, the track record demonstrates that.
And over the page, the decision is, on balance, I agree that it remains right to press ahead with Horizon despite the extra costs involved. Did the commercial importance of seeing Horizon through at that stage outweigh the kinds of technical concerns that we've talked about this morning?
No. I mean, as I said, the decision was in a round, and a business decision always is rounded by both technical, commercial, operational and financial aspects. That's a matter of judgment for general managers. But we would not, I don't believe, well, I find it really hard to believe that anyone from that culture at that time would have compromised quality knowingly in order to be expedient to suit strategic or financial matters.
I'm only going to ask you about a couple more documents. The first is a return to your witness statement, WITN 04030100, and it's page 33, paragraph 94.
Yeah, 94. Okay.
Yes, I'm just going to bring that on. Can we bring that on the screen? Thanks. So what you've said there is that you were less involved in the Horizon project as 1999 proceeded, and by May 1999 you were no longer involved.
At that time, yeah.
Can we look at poll 000-21469?
Oh, you're going to show me a document where I was. Okay.
Well, it's a board meeting. And
is this the one in 2000?
yes.
Yeah, that's me going, though, in my new role as MD Customer Management, and the board asking, I'm an attendee, aren't I, along with other people like, I don't know, someone else from, Basil Larkins, the Managing Director of Network Banking. You see, we all have different titles then because we're one of the 17 Managing Directors under it. But Basil was the network banking person. I was the Managing Director of Customer Management. And within that customer management, there was a smaller part of the job was to look at the opportunities for electronic government with the Post Office in general, including perhaps at counters.
You would have been present for the whole meeting, though.
I doubt it.
Would you have stayed for the part that addresses Horizon?
I doubt it.
Well,
I mean, the normal way of board, I don't know, I can't remember, but the normal way of board meetings, if you weren't a board member, was that you attended for the item in question that you were asked to present. Later on, when I was doing the 6-month job as the acting MD, and I attended board meetings, I would have been present at those board meetings, but that's later than that.
Can we look at page 7, the bottom of page 7? I think this is a document that we went through yesterday, and I'm not going to spend any time on it. But this is the part where discussions turn to the commercial development of Horizon. and things have moved on. I mean, were you aware, at least at that time, that things had moved on to commercial exploitation?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have been away from Post Office Counters Limited entirely, or the 3 business units that it had been split up into by then, including Post Office Network, which was Dave Miller was the managing director of, and he would have, we'd have met from time to time, and he'd have said, well, we're now rolled out to 4,000 offices. But clearly at that point, I certainly was completely unaware of any material accounting or balancing type issues at that point, and therefore my brief was, as part of my new job, to have a team looking at government gateway opportunities.
Who, if anybody, would you have passed on your knowledge to about those technical issues that you had gathered?
Oh, Dave Miller, obviously. We had that large overlap, didn't we? And there would have been quite a lot of continuity in the team from the team that were brought back from the PDA into work for Dave. I mean, clearly Stuart Sweetman, you'll be talking to Stuart, I think, later on. Stuart was still the group MD for those matters that included Post Office Network and network banking, so he will have had a rounded view about Horizon.
If there were concerns about Horizon at that stage, so March 2000, who do you think would have or should have raised them at the board level?
Well, I imagine the way it worked, certainly when I was managing director of customer management, Stuart was also my group MD then, who sat on the executive board alongside John, as the chief executive, and we would have had regular contacts on how the big issues in my patch were going, and if Stuart had thought they had been serious enough, or if I'd have proposed that I wanted board support, I would have expected the channel to go through him.
And finally, from me, I think you've asked to very briefly address the chair in respect of your overall reflections.
Yes, Chair. All I wanted to say was really in line with my witness statement that I fully respect this inquiry and really hope that you get to the bottom of it. I have been reflecting hard ever since I've been asked to come here as a witness back in May with all the documents. And I want to express my own sadness about the impact this has put on so many lives. And in some of the stuff I've seen either through the press or through recent documents that I've seen from later periods, I'm frankly baffled and shocked by how some of these people were treated, and I'm completely baffled, and it's not a culture I personally recognise in terms of the ethos of what must have been happening at that time or the governance that allowed it. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rich. I've just been given one very brief question that touches on earlier matters, and it relates to PFI. You have throughout your evidence referred to the difference that the PFI made to the process. Can you very briefly just tell us what you mean by that?
Well, contractually, it meant, as I said, the risk was for design, operate, build, and run was with the supplier, not with the procurer. In addition, because of this particular PFI, that also included the risk around benefit fraud occurring at post offices, which I'm not aware of any other PFI type project in the world that did that. It also meant that the supplier only got paid on outcomes and outputs. So until, for example, as I understand it, till the system was accepted before rollout, there were no substantial real payments to ICL. So clearly their cash flow projections from the start of it would have been completely up the wall, as we heard earlier from their parent company to John yesterday. The only other thing two other things I'd say. One is that, therefore, I think it was a learning experience because the nature of this PFI project was unusual. It was usually used by government for capital projects that were properties or leases or something like that, where it was some more secure and it wasn't really operational. So we were learning about the boundaries between being able to go in and assure ourselves of the details of the design, where ICL would have said, no, under PFI you don't do that, wait for the outputs and test them. And the final thing I'd say is that, of course, this project straddled two governments. So PFI was a Tory policy, Treasury guidance in the late 80s. New Labour came in middle of 97. And so there was some concern, certainly among sub-postmasters and others, and no doubt ICL, about what the attitude to a PFI project would be, whether it would be within policy for them to do it. And I think it morphed into what New Labour called a public sector, private sector partnership. So I think it got rebadged, really. And they early on committed, I can remember reading a document in the bundle, with a meeting with some postmaster, with the Federation actually, with a minister assuring them that it wouldn't be pulled on the grounds that it was a PFI project.
Thank you. Sir, I believe there may be a question or a short series of questions for Mr. Steen. Is that correct?
So yes.
Oh, all right. Yes, ask the questions, please.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Rich, my name is Sam Steen. I represent a number of postmasters, mistresses and managers in relation to what happened through the use of the Horizon system.
Yes, Mr. Steen.
You've just provided some answers to Mr. Blake that touch upon the question of PFI.
Yes.
When you were giving your evidence earlier today, you spoke about the Bird and Bird document you were being referred to, and you made this comment that it completely ignores the fact that it was under a PFI. Does that mean that the burden of governance, running, and general maintenance of the Horizon system was placed upon Fujitsu?
Primarily, yes, but I was also saying it in relation to the supposed innovation that they could bring in designing and developing the system. So a way of the report talked about a requirements analysis that was allegedly standard industry practice, which may or may not have been true. I don't know. Of course, I don't know if that was an outdated one, but my guess is that ICL would argue, I'll let them argue for themselves, that both they did the sufficient requirements analysis once they did it, and they applied a innovative way of developing it.
You've also made some general comments that you set out regarding your bafflement regarding what happened to sub-postmasters. I'm just going to remind you of part of your own statement, paragraph 116, page 39 of your statement. You say this: I'm truly baffled by the apparent later professional advice, investigative processes and governments that appears to have led to so many unjust prosecutions. Can we unpick that, please? What is the later professional advice that you're referring to?
I'm only reading what I've read in the media and in the judgment that was I received, that was in the opening counsel statement, that that it would seem, I don't know, I mean, Post Office Limited will now speak for itself, but it would seem that it was ill-advised in going ahead. The investigative processes seem to be ones that I didn't recognise from my days. Certainly non-disclosure would have been a real issue to me about with any investigative processes around fraud, and the governance processes, I'll leave that to Post Office Limited and perhaps UKGI, because I can't see how a board would have knowingly not noticed that 700 people have been prosecuted cumulatively, roughly.
Regarding your mention, your statement and just now of the investigative processes and also mention of governance, whilst you were at the Post Office and dealing with matters up until, I think, 2002, where you moved over to the RM group more generally, till 2005, what control was put in place in relation to the investigative processes as regards sub-postmasters, mistresses and managers?
Well, the investigative process, by the way, I wasn't involved continually until 2002, just to be clear on the records. The investigative processes were largely as John described yesterday, really. You know, the investigative processes were done separately and at arm's length. But if there'd have been a sudden hiatus or peak of them, I'm sure it would have been brought to the attention through the relevant senior manager who would have been in control of that.
You say that they were done at arm's length. What does that mean to the disclosure process of bugs and errors within the Horizon system? Were those bugs and errors brought to the attention of the arm's length body dealing with the investigation of sub-postmasters?
I don't know. I don't know, because the time I was there, I don't think there were bugs and errors that... I don't know. I can't be absolutely certain, but by the time I left in this period, in this phase, in March 99, I don't think, you might correct me, I don't think in the live trial offices there were any prosecutions brought.
Well, I could correct you. There were bugs and errors in place at the
Yeah,
time.
no, I didn't say that. I didn't say there weren't bugs and errors. I said bugs and errors that led to investigation and prosecution.
Mr. Rich, my question was in relation to what controls were put in place to make sure that bugs and errors are brought to the attention of the investigation processes. What can you help regarding that?
Well, we wouldn't have, during that time, if there were bugs and investigations that we thought had technical issues related to them, which is the point of the live trial, as I said, and therefore needed fixing, we wouldn't have put those to the investigation department.
How did the investigation department get to learn about bugs, problems, issues with the Horizon system? What's the system?
I don't know.
Who's in charge of it?
I don't know.
Who should have been in charge of it?
I don't know. I can't help you.
Anything else? David? Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
That concludes the questioning, I take it. And assuming that's the case, thank you very much, Mr. Rich, for making a detailed written statement and also for coming to give oral evidence. I'm grateful to you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It's now lunchtime.
Yeah.
Could we come back? Would it cause anybody inconvenience, including yourself, if we came back slightly earlier, perhaps at 10 to 2?
No, I was going to suggest that we, A, make a determined attempt to finish Mr. Copping this afternoon, and therefore, B, if it helps to have a shorter lunchtime, we should do so.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So we'll come back at 1:50.
Fine. See you all then.